Just like many Africans on the continent taking to the polls this year, it's important for South Africans to take stock of how far we have come and decide on what we want the journey ahead to look like. Budget 2024 serves as a pivotal moment to chart the course forward. Allocating resources strategically can drive inclusive growth, address social disparities, and lay the foundation for a brighter future.
At PwC, our purpose is to build trust in society and solve important problems. As a business, we find ourselves in uncertain times. We are confronted with unpredictability and advancements happening at a rapid pace. But through strategic and intentional collaboration, we are committed to uplifting those around us. It's now time to focus on the power of our shared humanity so that we can create opportunities that transcend barriers and empower communities to thrive.
In times of turbulence, true leadership becomes our guiding light. Bold, compassionate leaders guide us through challenges, inspiring collective resilience and fostering the sense of unity that is needed to overcome obstacles.
Let us remember that our strength lies in unity. In 2023, 115 CEOs across South Africa pledged their commitment to drive change in key sectors to ensure our economic recovery, with many ordinary citizens and NGOs also doing their part. The ask now is for government to leverage these partnerships so that we can rebuild business confidence, foster economic growth, create sustainable employment opportunities, and instill good governance. Through collective action, we can all be a force for good, and together we will shape a hopeful tomorrow.
Morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm just checking that you're all alive. The purpose of that video is a bit like going to a political party gathering where always the person in charge goes, "Amanda!" And the audience then is suddenly woken up and everyone stops talking and it says, "Pay attention to me." That's what that video is about. Grant Patterson, the former chief executive of Massmart and Edcon, but when he was at Massmart, Massmart was bought by Walmart. Walmart had a particular ritual that they went through that was very similar to that. They would have the Walmart song and the Walmart chant. And everybody would have to go, "Give us a W, give us an A, give us an L, squiggly." At Grant's first virtual meeting, he was given an office at the headquarters in the United States, and he stood at the computer bellowing at the top of his lungs. And he's a big man, is Grant Patterson. And after the meeting, they said to him, "Nobody actually makes the sounds, they just mime. It's okay, they just mime." But anyway, thank you for being on your best behavior. My name is Bruce Whitfield. It's my great privilege today to be hosting this wonderful panel of erudite professionals to try and decipher what the budget actually means. By now, hopefully, you know what is in the budget, so we don't need to go through all the boring bits, because it was quite boring. It was the fourth shortest budget in the last 15 years, 25 words longer than last year's, and half as long as Pravin Gordhan's 2013 effort, which went to nearly 10,000 words. So it was budget light this year, very much. And I've been involved with PwC's Budget Breakfast for the last 20 years or so. And I finally figured out the only way we're going to solve the problem is with a magic wand. Because we're in big trouble, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to talk about that trouble today in not only an election year in South Africa, but in one of the biggest election years in the history of democracy around the world, and how geopolitics plays a role in the outlook for South Africa. So lots of things to talk about. Just a little bit of housekeeping first, if we may. All of you have mobile devices. You also have this wonderful little card with a QR code on the other side. It's, for those of you who are slightly short-sighted, it's the red block with the squiggles on it. If you scan that QR code, you will be able to ask us questions. Those questions will then be automatically fed through to me, and we'll do our very best to get through your questions today. And if you will be identified as well, so if we don't get your question, James over here will make sure that your question is answered personally, because he cares about you and would like you to be very happy. For those in the room today, toilets are at the back on that side of the room, but you'll be so captivated, I'm sure you won't be able to leave. For those of you on the virtual platform, your CPD points are assured. Amazon has given special technology that ensures that you only get the CPD points if you remain fully engaged. So you have to be with us for at least 90 minutes today, and at the end, you will also get a QR code. Everything's QR codes this year. And then you just click on that and take you to a form so that you can register and ensure that you get your CPD points as well today. Everybody else in the room, you also qualify for CPD points, but if you get up and go to the loo, you have to stay for 5 minutes afterwards, please. I think that is about it in terms of what we need to do in terms of today's discussion. It is being recorded and live streamed, so if you need to pick your nose, be discreet. Otherwise, Shirley Machaba is our host today, the Chief Executive of PwC. Please, will Shirley give us a warm and bright and flourishing introduction. It's like the Queen has arrived. There's an entrance and everything. Please, will you give her a warm round of applause?
Remember anybody in mind? I wanna cry. I knew that you'd be here tonight, but suddenly I'm paralyzed. Who is she?
Thank you so much to our MC, to our esteemed panelists, Professor Bonang Mohale, Chancellor of the University of Free State, Feriel Hafaji, Daily Maverick Associate Editor, Professor Osman Molaji, PwC partner, tax partner, Kanti Pai, PwC Senior Economist. Our capable Program Director and MC, Bruce Whitfield. PwC clients, honored guests, and colleagues. Good morning and welcome to our 2024 budget event. I would also like to acknowledge my boss, Dion Shango, PwC Africa CEO and Territory Senior Partner. And to those attending in person across our various office locations, it's wonderful to have you here. And for our attendees who are watching virtually, a very warm welcome. In our recently launched 27th Global CEO Survey, we surveyed over 4,700 CEOs in 105 countries, including 380 CEOs from Africa. It was found that 52% of CEOs from Africa anticipate growth within their local territories. However, 40% of these CEOs are uncertain about the long-term economic viability of their organizations over the next 10 years. The challenges are real, we all know that. Regulatory uncertainty, infrastructure challenges, limited financial resources, high unemployment rates, economic growth, inflation, and energy crisis can all derail growth ambitions. These challenges are now not new to Africa or South Africa. Organizations are grappling with acute crisis, while also being increasingly unable to ignore the megatrends that are challenging their relevance and long-term survival. The PwC network has identified 5 megatrends, which we characterize as global in scope with long-term effect, touching everyone on the planet and shaping our world for many years to come. These megatrends are climate change, technology disruption, demographic shifts, fracturing world, and social instability. With the acute challenges and megatrends at the forefront, a key focus for business in South Africa will be on the reforms needed to boost business confidence, unlock investment, and stimulate economic activity. That being said, the Minister of Finance faced the difficult task of presenting a budget speech that strikes a balance between national spending priorities and limited resources. The adverse operating conditions faced by many businesses are negatively impacting revenue expectations. However, the Minister of Finance continues to show strong expenditure restraint, even though state-owned enterprises such as Transnet and Eskom, as well as other public sector wage bill, continue to pose significant risks to expenditure. It has been a tough few years for all of us, we know that. But sentiments remain hopeful for business and society. What stood out from the budget speech, and is definitely a step in the right direction, is the Minister's encouragement of private sector, investors, and multilateral institutions co-investing with the government in selected infrastructure projects. As business, we also have a role to play. It's about focusing our attention on solving important problems and building trust for both today and tomorrow. This is a critical time for businesses, government, and other stakeholders to work together in a more agile, resilient, and inclusive manner, and to commit to a meaningful and sustained investment in societal purpose which will result in the impact that matters. At PwC, this is not different. We are focused on collaborating with various stakeholders to bring our strategy, amply named as Ubuntu Betu, meaning our humanity, to life. Our societal purpose is aligned to the SDGs, those who don't know the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which hold us accountable to make a difference in areas where we believe we have the expertise and the skills, and where we can form key partnerships. Now is the time for government, business, and society to be collaborative and action-led so that we can deliver sustained outcomes in an environment where the risk of disruption is more intense than ever, and societal expectations has never been greater. I really look forward to our panelists' insights around the theme for our humanity. Now is the time to work together, which addresses both the intention of government's budget and the expectations that we have as a country. I'm really sure that all of us, all of you in the audience, you are really eager to get the panel going. So as I thank you for joining us today, I hand you over to our capable MC, Bruce Whitfield.
Shirley, thank you.
Enjoy the event.
So for many years, I've been trying to figure out the budgeting process. And you think to yourself that National Treasury employs some very, very smart people, and they apply their minds, and they think very deeply, and they look at the pros and the cons of their decision-making. This year, however, I'm told that this was used in National Treasury. And the finance minister said, give me a hat, and make sure there's a rabbit in it. Except the rabbit is not well. I've just got to check whether or not it's got a pulse. It's faint, but there is a pulse. We'll see whether or not we can give this rabbit any hope and any desire and will to live, or whether or not we'll be burying him in the back garden of PwC earlier on today. This is, I'm afraid, the finance minister's rabbit this year, a little bit droopy and a little bit sad. It's even got tears, I think, somewhere in there as well. Oh dear, it has been a tough budget. It has been a tough budget. Farah, let's start with you, because I saw the finance minister defending, you'll be fine, don't worry, just rest. I saw the finance minister yesterday having to defend the budget and to say this wasn't an attempt to try and win votes, and I would agree that it's a dreadful budget, possibly the best under the circumstances, but this wasn't a showy-off budget. This wasn't the death throes of an ANC government budget. This was a responsible budget of a party that looks like it thinks it might win the next election.
Absolutely, and thank you for the rabbit in the hat there. So I do think we could have had a Panyaza Lessufi, that's the Gauteng Premier-like budget. Big spending, grand ideas, bullet trains, etc., many hospitals to be purchased, but this is not that budget. This is the sensible ANC's budget. So while it's an election year, it's not an electioneering budget. And I do think that the use of the GFECRA, the Contingency Reserve, was an interesting move to begin to pare down our really crippling debt levels. So first, that I thought was important. The 1.4 billion rand allocation to NHI is a very good indicator that a plan that at the moment is still harebrained. I do believe our country needs proper universal health care, but to only give it 1.4 billion was sending a very loud message to the populace in the ANC. The small grant increases, personally, as a South African, I think they should have been bigger. It tells you another story. They've kept it within the usual envelope, which is just at inflation. The old age pension grant, so vital for our country, gets paid in 2 tranches. I can tell you more. The president becomes the biggest employer in South Africa. He now employs 1.7 million young people.
He did say he'd create jobs.
Yes, well, those are not the right jobs.
No.
But that it gets 7 billion rand is, I think, a good thing, because recent research shows the multiplier effect of public works, especially of young people, puts them into work. So for me, I think in bad circumstances, it wasn't a bad budget, and certainly not an election year budget.
No, thank you, Ferrell, for affirming that. Bonang Mohale, the Chancellor of the University of the Free State, one of the finest universities, certainly in the Free State, and the country, and the country as a whole. What's your assessment of the budget?
So the budget, Bruce, is presented with a backdrop of the 2 wars that we're experiencing simultaneously, concurrently, and in parallel, because context is everything.
When you talk about the 2 wars, you mean Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine, Russia, not wars domestically.
Absolutely. Okay. But also supply chain disruptions, because we are indeed an interconnected world.
Yeah.
But also no less than 50 countries that are going to elections this year, 15 of them in Africa, and South Africa is one of them. That's almost a third of the 8 billion global population. In that environment, I think the State of the Nation address sets the strategy. It distills and synthesizes 4, no more than 5, but key priorities for the coming year. Therefore, the budget is a financial language on how to execute on this strategy. So if you are a sitting president that came in with the most amazing goodwill, and you don't mention the word transformation in strategy in SONA, the Minister of Finance is not going to allocate the resources to make sure that you achieve your transformation objectives. Of all the things that we can choose to be, there is no doubt that all of us collectively, we have not succeeded in eradicating the legacy of apartheid. No. If it's not our number 1 priority, and the majority of our people don't have something to lose, they will ban the one fire truck that belongs to the village, like we saw in the 2 weeks in July. So for me, I think the words were codified by the Russian former president who gave us perestroika and glasnost, which is what we need today. Mikhail Gorbachev, when he said, when all we could do is to talk about our past, we knew that the end is near. These words are accentuated by ZAPU's Joshua Nkomo, who says this came late to me, that it is possible for a country to attain its political independence without its people being free. So there is no doubt that with this budget, how did we get here? When the country had so much potential, but we are now becoming poorer, and we have condemned the majority of our people into poverty. We are stealing from our children's future. Thanks, Bruce.
That's a powerful start. Thank you, Bonang. So was yours, Ferrell, by the way, but his was quite poetic as well. I do want us to talk about politics as well. I know this is the budget breakfast, but I think a lot of people in the room may have an interest in polling in elections, in pacts. Perhaps there may be some interest. So, Farrell, we'll come back to you maybe toward the end on that particular front. Kanti Pai, as an economist, and you can't treat this like an economist. On the one hand, it was fine. On the other hand, it was fine. An assessment, if you would.
Look, I mean, I think you're quite right. It was mainly magic. And the one thing that one has to think about is that in all budgets, what we spend is national income. So you'll always hear right at the beginning, the minister starts to talk about, the economic outlook. And in this budget, he talks about, a sense that national income will grow at double the rate it grew last year. Now, we have to assess whether or not that's something that's actually, I guess, credible. And what we know now is that, our big partners, economic partners, are not doing well. This week, many of us who follow the news heard that Japan is in recession, the UK is in recession. We know that China is not doing so well. And those are really three top trading partners. Those are places where we send our goods, that we dig up our resources. We also know that commodity prices have softened. The mining companies are telling us that things are actually quite tough. Then we also know, obviously, the domestic issues that we are facing. If you combine all of those things and then you look at the outlook, the economic outlook, or the national income that he thinks this year we're going to earn, one has to be a little bit concerned that we may actually miss that target, and I think that's the main thing. But if we reach it, then we are in really, really good space. But if we miss it, then, of course, it spells trouble.
The National Treasury, unfortunately, for all of the brilliance of the Treasury, they do tend to underestimate expenditure and overestimate income. And that's, we've become very used to that pattern. Last year, we're not going to pay civil servants anymore. They must be ridiculous. Okay, only 6% is fine. And that blew the budget within, I think, 3 days of last year's budget. This year, at least, the budget, I think, is a bit more honest in its expectations, except maybe for thinking you don't have to give Transnet any money this year.
Yes. I think that's something that we're going to have to watch very closely. As I say, it's as honest as if we think that we're going to grow as we think we're going to grow. It's as honest as we think that actually we can hold back from. But I think one of the things that come out of this situation of Transnet is perhaps what our CEO was talking about earlier around the partnerships that the government now expects from the private sector. That actually we can now allow the private sector to invest, to put in the money that the government can no longer actually put or invest in Transnet or any other state entities or in our economic assets or economic infrastructure. So that's where perhaps that signal that actually we are taking money now from and we're going to find new ways. And again, another trick will be that actually we are able, as a country, that the National Treasury can write the rules so that these PPPs actually work faster and much better than they've worked in years past. They have not been taken up because PPPs are cumbersome, they are difficult to work, and so many people, even though they want to, have not. And he even spoke very clearly around the issue of unsolicited bids, so that actually if you see an asset as a company and you think, I actually want to improve that reservoir or I want to fix that energy plant, you can actually put up the plan and take it to the municipality or to whatever department, and you won't actually have it, for example, being put to tender and getting lost in the system. That something actually will work. Yeah. So if we can do those kinds of things, we would have done much, much better. And that's a challenge, I guess, for business who have been wanting this opportunity, and hopefully we're actually going to get it.
Clancy, thank you very much indeed. PPPs are about collaboration, about working together. There's an Afrikaans word called samenwerking, working together. Former regulator of banks in the early 2000s when all the banks were doing joint ventures. And there were it was an insane world of joint ventures. And Errol Kruger said to me the one day, geez, I hate joint ventures. And I said, why? He said, because it's all about samenwerking. And I said, but that surely is a good thing. He says, yes, but the trouble with any sort of collaboration is, ons is saam, we're together, en jy werk. We're together, but you're doing the work. And that is always the risk, I suppose, of doing the PPPs with the South African government, who will very happily say, we'll take the capital. Thank you very much. Now you do the work. And I suspect a lot of it will play out that way. Osman Molaji, you've seen plenty of budgets come and go. What is your assessment of this one?
I have a slight disagreement with Ferial because maybe it wasn't an
Excellent, by the way. Well done.
maybe it wasn't an electioneering budget, but there's certainly clear elements of the election in there. And the thing that troubles me is just the question of the tax mix. Where did we go to get this 15 billion that we needed? And I think for most of the audience here, none of us are fooled that personal income tax has increased. I mean, I like the way a lot of journalists have been saying, thank goodness no tax increases. But because, you know, we don't talk technical about bracket creep and all of that, but that's actually been the effect, that we have close to 1%, okay, Carl Mandy will say 70 basis points, but we had close to 1% increase. That's actually the reality. The reason I don't like that is because that was the wrong place to go.
Why?
The reason that was the wrong place to go is, I mean, there's several statistics, right? So, for example, we are now pushing PIT representing close to 10% of GDP. And the OECD average is closer to 8%, which means we kind of like not over, but the OECD employment rate is like 3 times ours, or at least double. So we've got a smaller rate of employment, much smaller rate of employment, and we're collecting more from the small base. We're talking about roughly 3.5% of this country's population, of our country's population, contributing to 90% of our PIT collection. Our personal income tax collection, 90% of it comes from 3.5% of our population. Now, obviously, the bigger point there is still the stark inequality in our country. That's the big deal there. But my point is, this is the wrong place to be looking. And the reason I think we went there in such a sneaky, stealthy way is precisely because
Sneaky?
Well,
sneaky and stealthy. Okay, good. 2 good words, yes.
The reason we went there is precisely, I think, because it's an election year.
Okay, but let me put it to you this way. What is ironic about the sneaky, stealthy move is that if you're paying the marginal tax rate now 45%, as many people in this room will be doing, not necessarily with great joy, you're not going to be paying that much more. You surely are penalized far more if you're in a lower income bracket. And so you're paying a higher proportion, therefore, of your income in taxes. It's ironic, therefore, that the ANC would be targeting lower income earners, because that's essentially what you're suggesting.
Well, the lower income earners, and I think let's just be realistic, the lowest income earners are not, I mean, don't pay tax.
No, exactly. But we're talking about people with jobs who are earning above 80, 100,000 Rand a year or whatever the case might be. They're the ones who are getting nailed hardest by this.
And from our modeling, the ones that are going to be hardest hit, they're kind of earning around 350,000 Rand a year, which is not the majority of people here, but that's precisely to your point. We are going after the wrong people, but we've done it in a stealthy way.
So we should have done a wealth tax rather.
Well,
May I?
Please, Beryl.
Thank you.
Rescue Osmond. By the way, just before you go there,
Yes.
Anton Rupert, Johan's father, the founder of the Rembrandt Empire, always said, never pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. He was saying that never pick a fight with a journalist. And now you pick a fight with 2. We don't buy ink by the barrel anymore, but we do have data by the terabyte. But that's fine.
So, I mean, it's not my want to disagree with the tax prof, right?
But please do.
I do think that the SARS Commissioner has paid obeisance to the Laffer curve, which means that every time you put up taxes, actually what you get is lower. So
compliance falls, yes.
Yes, and I think this was the best possible way to deal with a difficult circumstance, although I hear you on a stealth tax. I must say, though, as somebody who's been reading every single manifesto that's come out thus far, all of them put in place some kind of wealth tax. So that's what's coming down the line after the election.
Yeah, but again, who sticks to a manifesto anyway, honestly? I mean, if you've read the last 6 ANC manifestos, promise, deliver what? What did the minister say the other day? It started with an F and ended with all. When it came to what was on the ship in Simonstown, then I think it means nothing.
I hear you on manifestos, but it is interesting to me to see how uniform it is across
Because
conservative
it's an
to
easy
progressive.
vote winner.
I
You
guess.
want to eat the rich. I mean, it's such an easy vote winner. But in practical terms, Osman, I mean, unless you go properly off-piste and properly nuts and really want to drive the economy into the ground, applying something like a populist measure, like a wealth tax, is economic suicide, I would think.
And I think that's precisely the point. And I don't know how, I mean, I want to use the word dangerous, but I don't know how close to the edge we are. But I do feel like when we start talking about broadening the base, personal income tax, including a wealth tax, even though I think we all agree that Bruce should pay more tax.
I would love to pay more tax. Pay me more, I'll pay more tax. I'd be delighted.
So, but this is precisely my question. I don't know where we are on that Laffer curve, and I do feel like we are dangerously close.
Sure.
And it's counter-populist to say that actually, as Matt Basanko says, VAT is actually the right way to go. But that is anti-populist. But that's where we are today, because it's an election year.
VAT would be the right way to go. So we should have bumped VAT up to 17, 18?
No, sorry.
There you go, there you go.
But that's a political response. We're talking
It's
about
not, it's a
technical,
poor
yeah.
people's response.
No,
right?
but poor people don't buy Lamborghinis and things like that. I mean, if you zero rate basic goods,
More basic.
more basic goods, and you make more basic goods zero rated, formula for babies, all that sort of stuff that's already zero rated, the stuff that's really important gets zero rated, and then you nail consumption. You clap in consumption. Put it up to 25%. And then we'll see the cars.
Okay, I was going to stop at 17.
Okay, I'm just looking for attention. That's fine. Auntie Pai, as an economist, is a wealth tax a non-starter? Now that you're part of the large, mighty corporation.
Well, as I said before, I mean, we're taxing national income. And so if you can find it, it's usually the best thing. And I think some of the literature out there makes it that sound like it's very difficult to tax wealth, because the wealthy know how to, to protect their wealth, to hide it in particular.
Thank you.
So
That's what I was going to say. Protect.
That's where it is. So, and that's really what has always been difficult. And at what stage you don't really, are we going to walk in and tax the farm? Are we going to walk in and tax your bank account? Those are the kinds of things that are difficult about wealth taxes, about actually how you're actually going to get to it. And that's why, many people don't. But I thought what was interesting is what they're trying to do now with taxes around that they don't want to compete, so that actually there's going to be some kind of uniformity around international taxes for corporates. And in that sense, they're saying, look, we're tired of actually losing taxes where people are operating their businesses in South Africa but paying their taxes somewhere else, that let's actually have some kind of uniformity. And that's something I think even working with the US and everybody else, trying to actually capture that. And that may be another area where you might actually see some positivity going forward.
Yeah, I didn't lay the ground rules down. Please, can we not use words like capture?
Okay.
It's just, we've had quite enough.
I take it back.
Withdrawn. Osman, explain please to me this tax, or this 15% tax on multinationals. Who pays it? Who's going to be responsible for it? It's only going to raise about 8 billion rand, which is 8 billion that we don't have, and 8 billion which is due. Is it a good thing that we are telling companies that they need to pay it here and not elsewhere?
And yeah, so that's exactly the point, Bruce. That 8 billion, if that 8 billion is right, is really going to be on the table. So this global minimum tax is not 15%. It basically means that if you are in any territory where you're paying less than 15%, you'll have a top-up, and so that you don't pay less than 15%. From an SA perspective, I think it's entirely appropriate that we do adopt this. It's been, people have been talking about the OECD's actually, developed the rules several years ago. We've all known about it. It's not a surprise. I think it was a little bit of a surprise that we kind of, in this country, backdating it to January. We thought it would come in January 2025. But the importance, I think, of it is that, to use the 8 billion as an example, is for SA outbounds as well as SA inbounds. That is, from a SARS perspective, from a national treasury perspective, 8 billion rand that is on the table, it will be taken by someone. Maybe it'll be taken by Mauritius, maybe by the UK, maybe by Australia, but someone is going to take it. So if you are, MTN or Vodacom, etc., those things will hit you anyway. they may as well hit you here in SA, and that money may as well come in. So I like that proposal.
Okay, and as the chairman of Bidvest, I'm sure, Bonang Mohale, you would concur. You've also been on the board of First Rand, of course. I mean, corporate South Africa, this is something that would be welcomed, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think business can do much, much more. Because business is not our second chance, but I think our last chance. For me, it's the opportunity cost that we are not actually calculating. And if I do some crude arithmetic, not mathematics, Prof. So if the interest rate is, say, 8%, and the inflation is 4%, it stands to reason that the economy should grow by at least 4%. Otherwise, you are going backwards. So in this tax and in this budget speech, when we are projecting, not this year, but the following year, that will probably be growing at 1.6%, and you say, but population growth is on average about 1.5%. In fact, you are accepting that your discretionary purchasing power and your money is buying you less this year compared to the same period 10 years ago. But also if you look at all the indices and you compare 2019 to where we are today, all of them are much worse. There is absolutely no reason why any South African should go to bed hungry in this time in this country when so many of us dare to hope that joy and peace will prevail. Because the poor Edward Kidsvetter collects on average in the last 10 years 1.4 trillion South African rands. You divide that by 60.02 million South Africans. In fact, Africa is not a poor continent.
No.
South Africa is not a poor country, just poorly managed.
Yes.
Therefore, there is absolutely no reason why 2023, he collected 2 trillion rands, having paid back tax refunds to individuals and to companies. He still banked 1.647 trillion South African rands. And why are we not using that to provide a better life for all, which is in every single solitary one of the ANC manifestos every 5 years?
Let's get, that's such an important point, and I think we'll wrap up with it in terms of what the future looks like politically, because I think that's, and the more South Africans who understand that simple principle, the better. But I wonder, Osmond, where we're going to get this extra corporate profit from. Yesterday, for example, Anglo-American came out with results. Profits down 94%. They are slashing and cutting and burning jobs, and they are trimming their asset base. They're looking at whether to stay invested in diamonds, in all kinds of commodities. That's going to take them a year to assess that. Goldfields came out with dreadful results, but it only mines the South Deep mine in South Africa. It gave the rest off to Neil Fronemeyer at Sibanye, and his profits were down by about 90% as well as a result of the collapse in platinum group metals prices. We had Pick n Pay come out with a rights issue yesterday, 4 billion rand rights issue. Plus, they're going to be listing Boxer separately. They'll have control of Boxer, but they're raising capital from that because their debt burden has gone from 3.5 billion rand in sort of June, July last year to 7 billion now. It's got a massive blowout. That's even more impressive than Eskom. Blue Label's a shambles. Tiger Brands under new management. Blue Label with Cell C and all that sort of stuff. Tiger Brands under new management, also not growing. Grindrod came out with a profit warning yesterday as well. Corporate South Africa is not on its knees, but my goodness gracious me, its legs are weakening.
Bruce, for me, that comes back to my point earlier on about the tax mix in SA. How reliant are we on corporate income tax and the mix between personal income tax, VAT, etc. And I think we probably need to use the analogy of, are you a risk-averse investor or an aggressive one? And if you are going to put your eggs into the corporate income tax basket, and I think we've seen this over the past few years, with corporate income tax, it's the most volatile of our taxes. That it doesn't track the economy and the GDP exactly, which means we have the promise of significant upside, and we saw that with commodities a year or two ago, but we also now, we have a particular track record with GDP. We find, as you are pointing out, corporate South Africa, temporarily, hopefully, going in the opposite direction, but it actually hits us very hard. That's, in fact, the main reason we're under-collected by 56 billion in this year is because of the volatility of corporate South Africa. So I do think it comes back to do we know who we are? Are we that, aggressive investor, or is now the time for calm and stability, which again is one of
a joke, isn't it?
Obviously, from a revenue collection perspective, I think the 2 points to keep in mind is obviously the tax nerds. We need to know our place. It's really economic growth that determines. That's the big thing.
Okay, absolutely. And economic growth, which is probably being overestimated anyway, because no sooner did the president say that load shedding was under control in the State of the Nation, we went to stage 6. That's the way we like to roll.
Which is out of Edward Kisweter's hands.
No, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been scraping barrels all over the country and chasing down people who owe money. What was the figure? He said something like 350 billion rands not being paid. And it's like, hold on a second, but then surely you send the hawks around, or you do send somebody around with a big stick to go and extract it. But, oh yes, we don't have enforcement capacity anymore. Oh yes, that's right. A question from Cape Town, and to all of you in the audience again, remember the little QR code. I hear some chatter in the audience. Clearly you are either agreeing or disagreeing. Or making weekend plans, which is also fine. But if you'd like to ask questions, please just snap the QR code and get your questions through to us. Question from Cape Town this morning. It'd be nice to have your names on the questions, particularly the more provocative ones would be good, so we know where to find you later. As the budget deficit grows and government borrows more to fund running expenses, what will be the impact if growth keeps to its current actual low trajectory? Please estimate when we will reach the point where we will struggle to borrow without hard financial terms. Auntie Pai, that sounds like your question.
Look, the thing, of course, that if we don't grow and we continue...
if we continue at 0.5, 0.6, which we've been doing probably since 2013 or thereabouts, that's the last time we had any decent growth.
Then we continue that trajectory, then obviously debt increases, the debt costs themselves continue. As we were told that we are now actually paying for every rand we collect, 20 cents goes to financing debt.
1 billion rand every day, including Saturdays and Sundays. Most civil servants don't even work on Saturdays and Sundays, but that's what happens.
Yeah, and that's really then speaks to debt sustainability, by which we mean, can you actually afford it? And that's usually where actually we get to a point where we can no longer make those repayments. And that's something that is now very, very...
But that's solvable, because all you go is to, what's it called? Jafekra. We love acronyms. But then you just go to the piggy bank and you go to Lesotho Khanyago and you put his feet to the fire and you say, give us the cash. And you take 150 billion rand out of the Jafekra account and you just help yourself. It's easy. Problem solved.
If only it was that easy and that infinite, but it's not. That's a finite amount that actually has been collected over a period of time and then has been growing by itself. I guess we've been very lucky that has happened. But certainly, it's not something that's going to be there forever. You'll remember the contingency reserve that we used to have around 2008, 2009, where we actually had savings. We ran out of that and we cleaned it out completely by the time we got into COVID-19. So these amounts of money actually do run out. We've only put in 5 billion in this budget. That tells us actually in a world that is as volatile as it is, we don't really have actually safety nets on which to actually to grab onto. We are at the debt levels we are now because we had spent everything that we had saved to be able to meet COVID-19 or any other crisis that we may find. And we live in a polycrisis world in which anything can actually hit us at any time. So that is something that we can't rely on, that will be with us for a while. And in many cases, perhaps one thing we can do is to print more money, but we know where that is going to take us. So it's going to be interesting, certainly when they release the detail around how we are actually dipping into this it
sounds close enough to rude to be quite rude. It's actually quite satisfying, isn't it?
Yeah. But really, again, it's a reserve. It's not growing income in itself. And we would have actually...
Explain this gold and currency, foreign, Jafekra, please, in words of one syllable or less, and in 30 seconds. No pressure.
So it's gold and foreign currency exchange reserves account. If you think about a reserve bank, right, most of us, when you think of a reserve bank, we see all this gold that's in there and all this currency that's in there. And that's really actually what our reserve bank started as a reserve for gold that held, the value of our currency. So we think about it exactly like that. and that actually you collect some of that, and it's been good in the past few decades to help us as a confidence measure of our currency, because obviously we know we import more than we export, so that's important for that. So it's been accumulated by the National Treasury for those purposes. And now that we actually have a little bit, because the rand has been weakening, so that actually the value of the rand, if you convert it, has now given us that extra amount of money. But that means
So it was strategic.
yeah. So certainly, so we are trying to draw down from that, but we still need that. We still need that very, very much, because it's certainly a confidence booster to the exchange rate. All nations need those reserves, because certainly if we don't have them, then we would actually be vulnerable to attacks on the exchange rate on any given time, and we don't want that. You want to have some kitty that says, you have some defenses should, we face crisis of any kind. So certainly it's not some money that we can keep dipping into. We need it very much, and that's why the Reserve Bank has been uneasy about actually sort of handing it over. So we're going to find out quite clearly how they aim to actually be able to release the 150 million rand to be able to be in a good
I mean, in broad brushstrokes, it's 50 billion a year that saves us 20 billion rand or 30 billion rand a year in interest payments. It doesn't quite sort of wash itself, but there is a logic to it. But the trouble here, Ferial, is that politicians are wonderfully addicted to other people's money. And it's kind of seen as a national piggy bank. It's seen as this is something we didn't realize we had. It's a resource. It's a reserve. We're just going to dip in and borrow from the reserve. It's something we can top up later. And we know how those stories tend to end up, don't we?
So can I just step back a little bit
Of course
here?
you can.
Thank you.
You're very lovely. You can do as you please.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. I feel like we can be very down on ourselves as a country, that we fail to see green shoots, and that when we do that, you can end up in a spiral downwards.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I do believe there are green shoots because I read your book and I begin to think like that, or Hans Rosling's Factfulness, where you let facts guide you, and the importance of lifting spirit and mood. So where might the money come from? If the port reforms hold, and I do think you're beginning to see them, at least some businesses are saying the ports are looking better, the numbers of ships there have come down, then your critical mineral exports could go up. We are the world's biggest place for business process outsourcing, basically call centers. My nephew was telling me, he was here from London, that when he tries to fix his utility bill, he finds someone in Cape Town to help him. So that's more and more common
As long as he
story.
doesn't find anybody in Joburg.
Tourism receipts are up way. I mean, you only have to land in Cape Town to see 7 flights coming in at the same time. So our numbers there are looking quite phenomenal. So I do see these green shoots. I do see the energy reforms beginning to hold. That stage 6 lasted a short time. Inamteto Nyati, as the chairperson at Eskom, I think it's a solid pair of hands there. So hopefully those will bear fruit this year. On your
Bobby
question,
Gotzel was also a solid pair of hands, as was Jabu Mabuza.
as was Andre de Ruyter, as were others.
No, exactly. So lots of solid pairs of hands have been broken.
Yes, exactly.
By
Point
Eskom.
taken. But
Yeah.
I do think the combo of your CEO and your chairperson at
Matters,
Eskom are
yes.
beginning to work now. On your point about whether it becomes like smack, you just take more and more from this contingency reserve, I hope not. And you have seen Lesetja Kganyago, still the best central bank governor we can possibly
Contract
hope
expires
for.
this year.
Yes, but I think will be renewed. I hope will
That's
be
a trend.
renewed.
We're seeing that happen,
Yes.
yes.
And he's made very important words, Kanti, on how that GFECRA gets spent. 125, 25. He said, we've got to set the rules first. And I think that's where we as civil society, all of us, we make sure that it doesn't become a piggy bank.
Yeah, absolutely critical. Just on that point, Ferial, question from Cape Town. Are we starting to see the impact of presidential reforms through Vulindlela? Could they lead to greater levels of growth? Now, you've suggested Transnet, and I'm
Yes.
getting the same sort of reports. People who deal with Transnet at a corporate level saying that the management team at Transnet is the best in a very long time, that there is real capability, real capacity, and real intent to actually do the job
Yes.
of getting stuff onto trains and onto ships, which is nice to have that change. Are you getting a sense that it is more widespread than that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and you've heard it from the Richards Bay Coal Terminal people. You've heard it from the ports operators, from Maersk, etc. The number of ships in our harbors has come down substantially since the disasters of December. Clearing out the top management has put in place people who are more attuned to the needs of the business community, and that's been vital. Here's the big problem, though. The minister is apparently sitting on making a really good appointment. It's either with the board or it's with the minister to make the kind of appointment which Transnet needs. That kind of political interference was, I was hoping, been put in the dustbin since we've seen what happened, but that hasn't been the case. Over at Eskom, you have a new transmission company. Priscilla Mabulani leads it. You've got a fabulous board there. I do hope you're going to see that grid expansion happening very, very quickly, because the Three Capes simply don't have enough power to get all these new projects onto the national grid.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ferial. Any disagreement with Ferial?
Actually, maybe one agreement.
One agreement? No, I want to hear you then.
I'm thinking, let me get on to the positive side of this conversation, where she is. One of the key areas of Vulindlela has been the critical skills list, and that has been something that's been very, very important to be resolved, which we have not resolved for quite some time. And finally, we have one, and the Department of Home Affairs has been working on it, because we need it for actually creating employment. Because those skills are skills, the Chinese have done so well, because they're willing to import the skills that they needed to actually create those industries to grow the economy and then bring in and transfer those skills. And hopefully we follow that kind of path, that we're able to bring in the critical skills that we don't have, we transfer, and then we are able then to create the employment locally, and hopefully that's the path we're going to follow, because it's always dangerous. Of course, you have the critical skills list, and you always have foreigners working, and we never actually transfer to any locals, and then you're not able to create the employment. So the trick now we're lacking is actually how then we make the transfers.
It's controversial, but I was in Dubai fairly recently, and 10% of the people in Dubai are Emiratis. 90% are either foreigners who've been deployed there or people who come in to do the jobs that the Emiratis don't want to do, whatever the case is. But it's a massively vibrant, highly profitable place as a result of a willingness to think more broadly. You don't have to let everybody stay forever, but for goodness sake, get their skills and then tax them on it, which is something that we could do very effectively. Bonang, Operation Vulindlela, and the sort of sense that the train is finally moving, not very quickly, but it's moving. The wheels are squeaky, but it's moving.
You see, facts you can't deny, but truth at least you can apply.
I shouldn't have called him a poet. I'm sorry.
So on the issue of borrowing from our children and selling the family jewels, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
When you dip into your reserves, because more often than not, you didn't even create these reserves. You depended on luck. But remember, we sold our crude reserves cheaply because of state capture, and we still have not replaced it, and therefore risking the energy security. We are now at the whims of the market. We can't even modulate. But also, you look at the budget. You say, but the president didn't even say one word about tourism. One, because it has the potential to have the greatest forex earner. Number two, you can kill two birds with one stone, because you can address the issue of job creation, but also the township economy. Because when you put a hotel in Mondlong, Kandlanutu, in the dusty hills of KwaZulu-Natal, or Langanyanga in Guguletu in the Western Cape, the young people walk to that hotel to go and work, rather than being on average 40 kilometers away from their places of work. And 30 years into democracy, that spatial apartheid planning, we haven't even started to reverse. No. When we have an opportunity to create our own towns, we do it with Cosmo City, which is still 40 kilometers away from the places of work. So when you add food, most people, 70% of their income gets gobbled up by just those two. Yep. Therefore, systemically, you cannot save. Lastly, I think there are only three things that keep us awake at night in Operation Vulindlela. That's why as business, we have offered with our own money and resources to say, let's help government to at least deliver the services which they are employed to do. Number one is load shedding.
Yep.
which we haven't solved in 16 years. Number 2 is the ports, that the Durban one is the third from the bottom. This is critical spine of our infrastructure. Lastly is the issue of law and order, safety and security. Because without that, who are you and what are you? But with load shedding, we have wiped off 2 percentage points from our GDP. If you measure the cost of unserved electricity 2022, that's 64 gigawatts. At 80 rands per gigawatt, there's 570 billion that are left. So at stage 6, you lose 4 billion a day. Between stages, that's 500 million. So if you look at the ports, you look at load shedding, this economy should have been 20% bigger. Thanks, Bruce.
Could have, should have, would have, the 3 widows of regret. Lots of questions, lovely questions. Thank you very much for all your questions. I'm struggling to prioritize. What credible actions could the government be taking to broaden the tax base? One, collecting the 350 billion that Edward Kieswetter is struggling to collect. That would be the first win, that we wouldn't have to be mucking about with Jafekra. So just hire some heavies and go around and collect them, collect the money. The credible shifts, I mean, what one thing that we could do that's smarter? Up that to 17%? Feral, no. I was doing that for you.
Well, there was one thing in the budget announcements that did make me smile, that I think was positive, just to the point about Commissioner Kieswetter's ability to collect more from what he already has. I'm referring to one of the discussions I was having with Elisera. I'm name dropping all over the place. But to continue my name dropping, as Shirley said at the beginning of our discussion, working together. So the thing that I liked in the announcements was attention is being paid to the dispute process. So right before, if you read the budget documentation, right before they go ahead and increase personal income tax, they make the point that increasing income tax could prompt negative behavior, was the exact words. So I think that's an important point. But where we are at present is that there's a huge amount, and just bringing it back to my day job, there's a huge amount of collectible revenue stuck in the tax controversy and dispute process, audits, etc. So there was a small adjustment, meaning you can get into ADR, alternative dispute resolution process, a little bit earlier. That seems to be where they're going. At the moment, it's a little bit of a drawn-out process. So that specific point for me is indicative that let's work together, because as we all know, the SARS doesn't apply IFRS and how they account for. If they issue an assessment, that's not revenue for them. They need to get the cash in the bank. And about that, can we get a more collaborative process with taxpayers, negotiate earlier, negotiate more fairly, and let's collect less cash instead of going for the big number and waiting 3 years for it. So I think that for me, and I know Commissioner Kieswetter won't be around for much longer, but I'm hoping this is the beginning of that.
In his job.
Yeah.
Sorry. Should there be an unfortunate accident, we don't want to have to come to you and say, Osman, what did you know?
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. But so that I think is one of the important levers that the Commissioner can pull, is to make more efficient the tax dispute and controversy and resolution process.
You think you're a good name dropper? I'm a good name dropper.
That's it.
The last time I spoke to Richard Branson, and he said that he introduced Nelson Mandela to the Dalai Lama. And I said, oh, Richard, don't be a name dropper. He's such a... Anyway, sorry, Kanti.
I think another thing that we really don't talk about, we want to grow the national income, the big pie, and I think the Prof is quite right about tourism. For that, we need to invest in the infrastructure that's necessary. We need to get to those towns. So we're going to have to build the roads. We're going to have to support it. The second part is, we are facing serious, and the budget brings us up, climate crisis. And that part of the budget actually is helping us say, look, how do we actually support sustainability? So sustainable infrastructure is going to be important, and actually invest because we are now people who understand that, we're not just cattle in the field. We actually are not going to wait for weather patterns. We're going to actually invest in also sustaining the resources that we have. So we have to defend. So defense is going to be part of the problem, part of the solution. And I think that was really positive to hear that the government is actually thinking about sustainability in a manner that we can invest in it.
There is a question here saying, how could South Africa even be thinking about a carbon tax in this environment? And that's because it's a present crisis. We may not see it and feel it to its full extent just yet, but if you keep ignoring it in the way it's been ignored for so long, 20 years' time, it's too late.
Absolutely. And we are seeing already the climate events. We can't say that we are not. We must speak to farmers.
Yes.
And they'll tell you how difficult the situation has become. We have to go to some places like KZN, where we've seen those kinds of floods that are driven by these climate events. So certainly we're already there. And how do we support people to be able to actually deal with that as something that's happening already? Because it actually is eroding our economic outlook. So that's something that we have to invest in, and in a good way, and the budget actually brings that out, and it was very encouraging to see.
A question for the professor. We've got two professors. This isn't an average panel. Two professors, actually. I'm not too sure, but I'm going to do to Professor Bonang Mohale. How does government balance the social responsibility versus the need to stimulate the economy for growth? Please provide your views on the COVID social grants, and should they be continuing? It's in an ideal world, no, they shouldn't be. In the real world, it's what stops millions of people from starving to death. Bona?
So the first, I think you could take tourism seriously.
Yep.
One, because for every one tourist, the facts tell us that you create up to 8 jobs. Two, imagine if we had just hung on to the million tourists we get only from India. And we compare ourselves with Australia because both of us are far from everywhere.
Yep.
Australia had doubled that number. And had we continued on that growth trajectory rather than lose them, because every single solitary one of the countries in the world, once they have you as a tourist, they hang on to you like their whole life depends on it. We could have banked another 9.3 billion in just 6 years.
Yeah.
The tourists from China in Australia, we still attract about 1.2 million. The Australians have increased that number to 10.5 billion.
Yeah.
If it was our numbers, we'd have banked another 10.5 billion. So what can we do? First, we have a problem. When a sitting president now celebrates that when we became free on the 27th of April, 1994, we found less than 2 million people on social security. And we increased that to 26 million.
Again, the 2 million was unrealistic, and that was discriminatory. We should have had lots more people on social welfare in those days. I don't think the apartheid government was very good about about supporting people. So, but the point is, the trajectory has the graph has gone almost exponential.
Absolutely, but that's the point I'm making. Your job as the president is not to condemn more people into social grants, is to create jobs.
Correct.
So that at least the majority of our people can get back their self-worth and self-respect. Now, when you introduce the 350 social relief of distressed grant, 14 million people apply, 10.5 million are granted. Now we have another 18 million who are depending on pensions. Of the 60.02 million South Africans, half of us are living below the poverty datum line. The unemployment rate is increasing. Youth unemployment rate, even with a narrow definition, it's north of 40 percentage points. But in realistic terms, it's 74.9%.
It's outrageous.
When young people of military age are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs with nothing to do, not only are we asking for trouble,
so
we're
why?
actively inviting it.
Answer me this question. Maybe, Clinton, you can answer me this question. Why has the Arab Spring not happened? The South Africa Spring, whatever you want to call it.
I'd like to suggest that we're already there. If you look at the levels of crime and violence in our country today, if you look at gender-based violence, that kind of thing. I mean, we're now being robbed at highways. You stop in traffic and we are being robbed by young people.
Desperate young people.
And so that is, it looks different. Our Arab Spring clearly looks different than others, because I guess you have no sense of the way it would work. You know, the French do it differently because they go in... Exactly. So I like to suggest that we're already there. This bomb we've been talking about has exploded.
Yeah.
We're afraid to go. I mean, you know, if you thought for a long time that our big walls would help us, now you actually have to get outside of your house, and, you know, the people that are outside our society will find us there. So that, I'd like to suggest that we're already there. We're certainly there. Yeah.
I think it's a good point. Mismanagement of public funds is certainly a contributor to the position we find ourselves in as a nation economically. Any suggestions from the panel on how to reduce the risk of mismanagement of public funds? The Chinese, I remember writing a column for the Sunday Times on this one, and the Chinese have got quite a strong approach to this, and people get executed for corruption. I'm not suggesting we go that far, although, I don't know. Could we be a little firmer, perhaps, and a little bit more efficient in the processing of criminals? We've just had our first judge who's been booted out of his job, Judge Hlophe, who's held on to 15 years with spurious arguments. We do like to extend our fights in perpetuity, Ferial, and give everybody absolute benefit of the doubt, Jacob Zuma and many others. Speeding up the justice system, perhaps, would be one way of sending a signal that some behaviors are intolerable.
Absolutely. I really like the Chinese model of the tigers and flies. I must say to you that you catch the tigers and the flies, the big and the small, who are caught doing corruption. Maybe don't hang them all, but they certainly are paraded publicly. So it's real public opprobrium against corruption. Here by us, the ANC is still debating, I hear loudly, whether or not to include its cadres named in the Zondo Commission on its election list. Now, how's that for a message? Do you all remember the weekend special Finance Minister Des van Rooyen? He chairs the Gauteng Tourism Authority. How is that? I mean, so there is nothing our governing party is doing that, to me, suggests seriousness in dealing with the politicians at the top of our corruption problem. I know we mustn't say state capture. The NPA
No, you can say state capture, just don't use the word capture in a positive sense, because it's...
Okay, so state capture, the NPA is doing its level best. It's enrolled 36 major cases every time you read, but there are minions. It's not the example isn't being made at the top, and that's a real problem. Huh? Yeah. So the judge does this work for 3.5 years, puts out a brilliant report, in my opinion, and there's small reforms being put in place, but not the macro ones he suggests.
But that's the politics, isn't it? I mean,
it is the politics.
That's the politics, that's the mess.
We're going to see all the people named in that report big on the election list. In fact, 2 of them are leading the ANC's election campaign. That's not serious. Eh?
No. What is the expected impact of the savings extraction from the 2-pot retirement scheme on the GDP forecast this year? 2-pot retirement scheme comes into force later on this year. What are its consequences? I'm a little bit apprehensive just because South Africans love to spend money ahead of time, and I'm concerned, it's again a populist move, on how this plays out. Kanti?
So as I follow the debate and the discussion, it started out with people need access to their money because they're highly indebted, but also some of them are looking to buy certain assets, so you buy a house. So if it is that it helps perhaps to open up some space, some breathing space for people, and that actually also they're going to buy some assets. That could help us with the construction sector perhaps, because people are going to build themselves homes, or whether they build them here or in rural areas. That it gives us a little bit of expenditure in terms of them having some breathing space for their capacity to spend more, because they would have opened up that space for debt. And that might actually also make, I guess, the banking sector a little bit healthier if people are actually now maybe covered up in that sense. So perhaps there is something positive about that. I think, as I understand it, there's also the opportunity for reinvestment. So I think if that's the conversation we're having, then of course there's something positive that's coming from it.
A couple of comments rather than questions. A comment saying, when we worry about the future of South Africa's economy And we are not spending more time looking at education as a lever for long-term economic growth. Transnet, Eskom, water infrastructure will continue to fail without improvement in education, and they will continue to absorb the funds that we need for the future as well, rather than actually investing in growth opportunities, which is today's young people. And there's another one from Durban in capital letters, so it's I think it's quite a cross one, or you just don't know where your caps lock is, I'm not sure. But instead of wealth taxes and individual tax increases, look to tax businesses not in the net and cash businesses. Tax the myriad of donations seemingly drifting around that are disguised as loans and never paid back. And the problem is, Osman, I mean, as much as that is absolutely logical, tracking the blighters down seems to be what is so difficult. And we've had the stories of the SARS person who sat at the Elfin Hotel one day on a Saturday morning, and the Ferrari Club of South Africa turned up, and 15 Ferraris were there, and she took down all the registration plates and worked out that not a single one of the people who was driving one of those Ferraris was actually registered either as a taxpayer or more than 300,000 rand a year or something, because of the way people own these cars and different structures and things. There's got to be a better way of tracking down delinquents.
Well, I think this is one of the big areas which I think should get attention and is getting attention. Can people hear me?
I think so.
Okay.
Can you hear him? No, there's nodding.
Okay. And I think this is one of the areas where SARS has been investing, and especially I think one of the ongoing investment into technology. I do think that's probably the biggest lever that we can pull here in tracking these kind of I suppose the tax gap. I'm not sure that there's much else other than this kind of investigative, driving through all of our rich areas, taking down addresses and going to the deeds registry, seeing who owes them. And the Ferrari example, the thing that I like is that has been identified. Are we getting the results yet?
It was identified 15 years ago, though. That's the problem.
Well, I mean, we need to talk about, again, SARS staffing, allocation of resources. They're stealing people from PwC, etc. Again, I think it's like many of the stories in our country.
Sneaky, stealth, and stealing. The three S's, right?
I think we've identified the problem. There's this ongoing, how do you apply the resources to get there? And I think we've got the right intention is probably the best thing that I can say.
Ntate Mohale, why don't you run for the presidency?
Yeah, that'll be
Because he likes his life.
I would love to be president of business, not of the whole country. But I think
It's a terrible job, isn't it? It's actually probably one of the worst jobs in the world. Any president of anything, frankly.
And I think it's thankless, because when you set your ambition not to improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people, but your ambition is I want to be the richest sitting president, then you have a problem. But we don't learn from history, because we are prisoners of our own ideology. Many years ago, we had an opportunity, pandering to labor, to move away from a defined benefits fund, where 100% of the risk sits with the employer with deeper pockets. We take that risk, we give it to individual employees who don't know the difference between income and cash. Now we say we are introducing a two-pot system. Spend your money earlier instead of worrying about retirement. We'll double the number of people who are on social security. But the money that we steal, if we stopped only the bleeding, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because the 5 years of state capture, we stole 1.4 trillion. That's 2/3 of what Edward Kitzvetter collects in a whole year. In the height of state capture, the 9 wasted years, we were siphoning off on average 20 billion a year, every year, just to the 2 Zutda families. Yeah. Here's my last point. On Wednesday, we hear that Msebenzi Zwane has been found guilty not once but twice of defying cabinet.
Yep.
And now we say, no, we are going to dock only 50% of his salary. The problem is the president came in with 178 votes from the 54th elective conference in Nazareth.
I was there.
He finds 30 thieves. He chooses to reappoint the 20. Those 20 not only sit in cabinet, but he goes on to promote every single solitary one of them to be chairpersons of the parliamentary portfolio committees. So we're not serious about addressing crime.
Very well. Let's look ahead to the 29th of May. It's a Wednesday. It's early winter. The days are a bit shorter than in April when we traditionally like to have our elections. We probably have 20 million registered voters. They go to the polls. What do they do? Other than page through reams of voting ballot papers to try and find the one that they hate least. I mean, like the most, sorry.
So by today, I think 28 million or 42 million eligible voters will have registered. That's a lot of people who've decided they don't really trust or want to be part of the system. Of those who have registered, about half turn up on the 29th of May. So how much legitimacy in that system is something to calculate. But what will those people do? So Ipsos is telling us, and this is the latest analysis by Daryl Swanepoel, who advises the ANC through the Inclusive Society Institute, that the ANC right now, nationally, could get between 48 and 53%. But that it is likely to go down to, likely to lose KZN, Gauteng, definitively, and perhaps the Free State as well.
To whom?
I'll come to that in a moment. It's too many.
I mean, it's exciting. Sorry.
The other piece of data from a much bigger poll, that's 9,000 people. Ipsos polling is about 3,500. This was for Roger Jardine, former RMB chairperson, who's now started his own party called Change Starts Now. 12,000 people polled by Prof. David Everett. He says there's absolutely no way the ANC is coming back, that it's likely to get 42%. My money, because if you look at what Frans Cronje is doing at Social Research Foundation and at the year's by-elections, is that Cyril Ramaphosa will be back for a second term, but as part of a coalition government. And I think it's going to be a coalition government, and you can tell me what you thought of this, with parties like Al-Jama, the Good Party, the AIC, parties with whom it's coalesced at metropolitan governments already. In Gauteng, I think you're likely to see an ANC-EFF coalition, and in KZN, likely a DA-IFP coalition. Free State, I haven't looked at closely enough. So that at the moment is what South Africans are likely to do.
How significant is Jacob Zuma in this election?
Hugely.
And the MK party?
I mean, Bonang will give his view perhaps. I think that Jacob Zuma has come out as an outlier and has quickly become a factor. He was an outlier.
He was a liar, now he's an outlier.
I didn't say that, you did, but yes. So started this MK party, and in 3 by-elections, it's made significant gains in the north of KwaZulu-Natal. Social Research Foundation says they're likely to take 20% in KZN. I think there'll be a phenomenon only there, and perhaps in parts of Gauteng. The former president wants to be president again. The IEC is saying, you absolutely can't because you're a convicted criminal. For the other case that he went to jail for 2 hours for.
I think it was 2.5.
So I think that's going to be a big noise, is whether he gets to run, gets to be on the ballot paper, which at the moment is a ballot book.
It seems impossible legally, yes. But he certainly is persistent.
It's interesting to me that the former president wants back. He really, if you look at the MK party, and he's very richly funded, its social media is fabulous, its election material is significant. He really wants to be president again.
Well, he's seen other 80-year-olds around the world.
I guess he has.
I'm in, I'm in.
Yes. But it's one to watch, eh?
Okay, that's kind of terrifying. Kanti, any thoughts on the politics of this election as an economist?
No, not really. I don't have much. I mean, I follow social media, and I quite a lot. And I agree with Cyril that there's actually a lot that's actually coming up there. But I think it would be interesting if we started to have these younger parties that are coming up, in Parliament, because we need a relatively new energy and new ideas and kinds of things where people are relatively more educated, more connected, more challenging, so that actually then, we are actually able to. I mean, we don't, in South Africa, for example, many MPs today don't recognize that tax is low. You'll have MPs complaining about how high taxes are. And you recognize that actually this means that, there isn't a recognition that a budget being presented means that it's something that you must debate and that you must make into law. That's your responsibility. The younger guys who are coming up are starting to think about those kinds of things. And hopefully, as we go past this election, and if there is a coalition, that those things now are debated. There's opposition to certain elements of the budget that are not favorable. Those kinds of things will be important, because actually we need much more robust thinking around our economic policy, new ways of thinking about it, and better ways of actually making sure that Parliament can actually hold government accountable for what they promise to do and how they spend the money.
Osman, you're not a political animal, I don't think, but does the politics concern you?
I think that the politics does concern me because of tax morality. It's something that, again, if I go back to Commissioner Kisweta, that he's been working on and continues to work on. So I think all of these, the discussions that we're having, do we have the kind of collective desire to pay the right amount of tax? That's obviously from a PwC perspective, that's one of the things that we try and make sure that we support people. But the big thing, I think, that worries me about the politics is tax morality.
Okay. Bonang, you've been known to be slightly outspoken on issues of politics and the state of the nation. This upcoming election?
I thought I was outspoken on the economy.
Well, in South Africa, they're interrelated.
But politics determines economics.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what you do in business. If the politics go south, you go south with it.
Yep.
In KwaZulu-Natal, I agree absolutely with Ferial, because the new addition of MK, the figures say probably the ANC might get 25%, the IFP 24%, MK 20%. It's going to be quite interesting to see the coalition that comes out of that. Two, I think there's a bigger role to be played by business. And I'm glad that people like Roger Jardine are sticking their neck out, because nature does not allow a vacuum. But imagine if business stopped funding these political parties commensurate to their representation and insisted, agitated, and orchestrated that we'll fund only those parties that sign up to no less than 5 commitments. Number one, transformation, because this economy must look like us. We have to give people something to lose so that they don't go about burning stuff. Number two, good governance, ethical leadership. But number 4, service delivery, because that's the job description of the bloody politicians. Lastly, law and order, safety and security. I think if we did that, then from the tax point of view, I think we need to acknowledge that South Africans are probably being taxed to death, because marginal tax rate 45%,
I don't think
you
anybody
add
would-
15%
I don't think
of
anybody would
everything that you
object.
buy.
I don't think anybody would object to that tax rate if what you say was applied and was effectively done. Then you're very happy to pay over the money because it's been properly spent and properly allocated.
Like the Scandinavian and Nordic
Yes.
countries broadly, they not only have the highest happiness index in the world,
Correct.
but they pay, say, 50%, but then everything is free. Here, you pay 45 plus 15%, so you are left maybe with 35%. You provide your own private education, private healthcare, and
Electricity,
private
water.
security. Now, and you can see that South Africa is not making itself an attractive place to live. If you had 1,000 rand 10 years ago to invest anywhere else in the world, I think you'd have done better than here.
Unfortunately, yes. I'm going to give each one of you the magic wand. Osman, I'm going to give it to you first. We've got this budget. This budget then will be law until the next government comes in. A new finance minister, possibly, will then present a medium-term budget policy statement in November. If that person was you, what is the one change you would bring? Pharaoh's beginning, I see beads of perspiration building. Excellent. What's the one thing you would do differently in budget, medium-term budget policy statement, November See, it's hard, isn't it? You tear the guy apart and you've got nothing to add, honestly. What is the one thing that you would do, given the opportunity to do it? Just one thing to make things better.
Yeah, I'm going to cop out here, Bruce. The
No,
only
you
thing
may
that-
not cop out.
The
I'll
thing
take
that
you.
the thing that I feel would be most important to me as finance minister would be to shout at the rest of my ministers to say, this is... There we go, okay? The thing that I would do as finance minister would be to shout louder at the rest of the ministers and to the president, because this is all your fault. The reason I'm struggling to collect more revenue, yes, you know, we can do well with Commissioner Kisweta, etc. And there's a lot that we can do, and well, that's what's happened this year from a tax perspective, is that we're kind of tinkering around the edges. The real problem are things like Eskom and the ports, etc. That's where the real problem is. So if I'm finance minister, I would look to the other side of the room like this.
You would demand to be more of a finance director than a finance minister, perhaps.
Exactly.
And maybe withhold funds from government departments that still are spending bottles of water at $50 a bottle or whatever the case is. Say, until you sort that out, you don't get a budget. Cheers, you're out. Well done. Have the wand. That's Harry Potter's wand, by the way. It does magical things.
So what people need more than anything else is jobs.
Yep.
Because the stubbornly high levels of unemployment then lead to increasing levels of poverty, which then leads to increasing levels of inequality.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm taking Osmond's, okay?
No, you're not.
Yeah, I am. So who of you put rooftop solar in your homes? Maybe lots there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so my two things are massive zero rating of the VAT rate, especially for the items that keep hunger from the homes of poor communities, and then big solar rooftop installation incentives. Thank you.
We just taken that incentive away in this budget. Actually,
Yeah.
it was very quiet. It was a rubbish incentive in the first place.
And a better one.
Exactly. It just wasn't. It really was a nonsense idea anyway. It's now been taken away. It was ineffective. Kanti, last word to you,
I think
Finance Minister.
this came up a little earlier, the informal sector or the township economy. In countries like us, and I think we saw the Growth Lab Harvard report that came out.
Yes.
Very much focused on this, in the sense that if you look at our peers, Mexico, the rest of the continent, they rise to about 40% of the employment coming from that. You want in the informal sector because it's, and you want to be able to support it in a manner that it is able to be connected and that people, with some of the research you've seen, Stats tells us that people now stay in the informal sector for more than 10 years. Whereas it used to be 3 years where people just came in, started a small business because couldn't find a job. Now that's actually a real thing. And that's where we have to actually spend a little bit more time and some effort and resources supporting the informal sector and allowing people to believe that actually they can do better in the informal sector.
So what's the one action you would take as Finance Minister to wave that magic wand to make things better?
So I'd say let's fund the informal sector. Let's put in resources that allow the informal sector to thrive, and then we'll be able to bring them into the tech space.
Out of 10, down the line from you, Kanti, this budget, give it a score.
6.
6. Ferial.
6.
Wanang. You're a chancellor of a university, you know what marks are. 5, so still a pass. Okay. All right. Osman.
I would have given it a 4, but I'm being lenient because it's an election year, so I'll stick with 5.
That is a pass mark, but just. Ladies and gentlemen, please will you thank our wonderful panel and PwC for hosting us today. And thank you very much for coming. And one last thing, if you are watching us virtually, that QR code is up for just 15 minutes. Please, in order to get your CPD points, scan the QR code and follow the instructions. I'm told that it is a perfectly safe QR code and that you won't find your computer systems hacked and taken over by the bad guys. But thank you, everybody, for coming. Lovely to see you all. And thank you, everybody, for joining us virtually as well. Thanks very much.
So lovely to be with you. Thank you.